Hey, what's going on, everybody, and welcome to the first ever episode of My Garage. Today, the project that we're going to be starting in on is we're going to be putting this 7.3 liter Powerstroke into my 1994 F350. So currently, right now, my truck has a 460 that I converted to a 5-speed manual because the automatic lost second gear. I actually got the truck with a blown up engine, and I took the time. I went and I rebuilt it. I did a bunch of performance upgrades. I did Banks exhaust. I changed the cam, had the heads redone. The truck makes really good power. It actually runs quite a bit better than a stock Powerstroke Diesel does, but it gets 9 miles to the gallon no matter what I do. And if I hook something to it, about 8 miles to the gallon is about the best I get. So as much as I hate to get rid of that brand new engine, it's only got about 1,500 miles on it. I ended up picking up a parts truck out of Copart. I got it relatively cheap. I have a complete engine with all the wiring and everything that I need to make this happen. So I'm gonna just swap it over to a diesel. So I figured this would be kind of a cool project. I actually have a bunch of projects I'm always doing, and figured I should probably start documenting them and share them on YouTube. So basically what we're going to do, I'm going to do the step-by-steps on how to get this thing apart. I need to replace the injector cups in it. I'm pretty sure I have an injector seal that's leaking because it does have a little bit of a hard start, and I had a little bit of oil in the coolant. The oil cooler on this thing is leaking really bad, and I think I can actually get this thing to be pretty healthy. So my plan is to take this engine, put it in my truck, convert everything back to an automatic, being is that I have a good E4OD automatic transmission. It's already had a little bit of work done to it. It has an upgraded torque converter and a shift kit. So I think I'm going to run all of this. And then when I start getting the thing running good and know that I don't have any problems, I'm going to start doing performance upgrades to it. Right now, the only thing that the truck has, for the diesel anyway, is a 3-inch downpipe with a 4-inch exhaust at an S&B cold air intake, and that's it. Everything else is completely stock. So I'm hoping I can get some good power out of it, get some good fuel mileage, and pretty much just have fun taking on this challenge. So let's get started, huh? So one of the things I noticed right away when I got this truck is that I had a whole bunch of oil all over everything. And when I started getting into this, I was finding all kinds of weird things. For example, this bolt. Somebody got a little carried away when they were welding this together. Not even sure what the theory was or why they did it. And actually, I'm going to need some light. Excuse the mess out of my garage. It is ridiculous right now, but we're going to get this done. So if you can see if I can get light on it. Right there, that little fuel line that goes between the fuel bowl and the fuel pump, starting to crack. Those are just an absolute nightmare to replace. I've got connectors in here that are broken and zip tied together. There's just junk all over the place. I can see these high pressure oil lines here starting to split. The clamps for the boots going onto the manifold aren't even in the right spot. You can actually clearly see the labeling of clamp and showing its placement. This truck didn't really put out a ton of boost. It was just kind of anemic, actually. I got the engine out. I started checking things. The back pressure valve is kind of stuck. I'm missing a bolt out of the turbo. I got oil that was running all down the place from back in here. You can actually see in the drain hole there for the valley, there's a hose clamp sitting in there that who knows where that used to live. And then if you look at that bolt right there for the pedestal, it's backed out. So I'm sure that was causing a bunch of the oil leak back here. But you can just see everything is just gooey, nasty. There's just junk sitting everywhere that doesn't need to be. There's just oil leaking from all over the place. The oil cooler was actually leaking so bad that I had it spraying down the side of the truck. it's just not happy. So I'm going to pull that out. We're going to reseal it. There's going to be a fuel bowl delete. We're actually going to get rid of that. We're going to get rid of the mechanical fuel pump, mainly because it clutters up a lot of stuff in here. It has leaks, it has problems, and I want to do it while the engine's out, because a couple of the fuel line that you need to get to, the fittings, there's one back in here. You have to pull this whole accessory bracket out. There's another one that sits right there that you have to get behind the AC compressor to do. And then there's one back here at the back of the head, which is buried in the firewall of the truck. And then you got this guy here, which sits behind the turbo. So it's just really hard to do. So I'm going to do the irate regulated fuel system return while I have the engine out, just to make my life easier. You can see we got right here a bolt missing out of the valve cover. I noticed that there was another one missing right here, which is probably the reason why we have so much oil leaking back here. So we're going to start by cleaning all this stuff here off of the top. We're going to get the valve covers off. We're going to get the fuel injectors out. We're going to work on getting the injector cups replaced, and then just kind of cleaning this thing up. That's pretty much where we're going to start. So as of right now, I have all the oil drained out of it. I have the coolant drained out of it. I actually pulled the block drain for the coolant. If you're not familiar with where that is, it's actually that guy right there, and it'll drain most of the coolant out. I think this is an 8-quart capacity system, or excuse me, 8-gallon capacity system, and I got about 7.5 gallons drained out of it. So there's probably still a little bit in there. I'm sure as soon as I start turning this over, it's all going to dump out. I can actually see down in here, if I get some light, we still got coolant down in the water pump. So I know that I'll be making a little bit of a mess, but that's part of doing an engine. All right, so we're going to start with pulling out this turbo. One of the things that's really easy with having it out of the truck is all the hardware is really easily accessible. There's two 15mm nuts right down in here. There's one there, and then another one back in here. Those actually were loose. They came out really easy. And then we got two 13mm head bolts here at the top. All right, so now that we got the turbo unbolted, we're going to do the two lower pipes. So we got all the bolts out of the exhaust up pipes there. I did have a little bit of a struggle with getting right down in here where the EGT probe is, but not that big of a deal. The bolt was just facing backward. So now we have the up pipes out of the way. So now the next thing we got to do is we're going to unbolt everything that attaches to the turbo. So the white pipe's got to come out. We're going to pull this whole bracket and air intake off. And then we're going to undo the pedestal and get the turbo out all in one piece. Probably going to be the easiest way instead of breaking everything down individually. So I just wanted to show a couple things here real quick while I was taking this stuff apart. So here's the Y that comes off of the turbo. Look at this hose clamp. That thing's barely holding on. You can see that is going to lead to some of the turbo issues, the boost issues that I was having anyway. And then of course, the amount of oil that comes in these through the doghouse. So if you're not familiar with how the CCV system on this works, or crankcase ventilation, it comes through this right here. It's called the doghouse. That little elbow goes up into this intake, and then all the smoke, crankcase pressure goes right back down the intake into the turbo. And then it gets blown right back down into the engine. So kind of one of the spots on this engine that has always been a little bit problematic, something to keep an eye on, but it is what it is. It's a diesel, they do that. The other thing I found, this O-ring right here, you can see has actually been cut, and right here, it wasn't even lining up right with this, and it was probably cut and creating another boost leak. So finding out all kinds of issues why this thing wasn't building very much boost. I was only getting about 8 pounds. And then last, of course, the funniest part of this whole thing is this bolt right here that is all welded together. So I finally got it loose, and trying to get this thing out is quite interesting. I'm really not sure why this is ever even done, because the amount of time it took to weld that together probably took longer than it would just to put a regular bolt in it. But the good news is it's coming out. That's awesome. All right, so now we got the turbo completely unbolted. We got the intake is off, the 4 pedestal bolts, we got the down pipe, the up pipe, the Y. So this literally just lifts off all in one piece. Okay, now that we got the turbo out of the way, we can kind of get a little bit better idea of what we're dealing with in here. So if you're not familiar with these, this right here is the oil feed line. This is where your lube oil pressure comes from the engine, it feeds the turbo, goes through the turbo, and then it comes back down through the drain. So I can see oil all over in here. Clearly this wasn't sealed, it was leaking. Here's part of the connector that's broken here for the back pressure sensor, or excuse me, the back pressure actuator. And then right here, I got a nut that randomly fell in there. That actually looks like an exhaust nut. So now you can kind of see here how the fuel pump is set with your 2 supply lines going to the back of the head. So with doing the irate regulated return fuel system, all of this goes away. We lose these 2 rubber fuel lines here. The supply and return line you have to modify, and then all of this comes out and goes away, as well as this fuel filter bowl. So we're gonna have to actually set up a new fuel filter down on the frame. And actually here, just noticing, look at what we got going on right here. This is actually crushed because someone over tightened the hose clamp, which again will create another boost leak. So I'm gonna have to see what we can do about fixing that. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna pull this fuel pump out. Pretty simple, just 2 10mm head bolts, these 2 fuel lines, and I'm just gonna cut right through these 2 rubber hoses because they're already rotten, they're starting to crack, they're just gonna be a fight getting off. So we're gonna pull this out. I've already drained the fuel bowl. So I lied. I can't just cut these 2 hoses, undo those 2 bolts, and take out those 2 lines. I forgot that there's a 3rd hose way down there that is the feed into the fuel pump that has to come out. The other thing that you have to do before you take this fuel pump out is, because there's a push rod that pushes on that fuel pump and rides on that cam lobe. If the cam lobe is pointed down and you pull that fuel pump out, that cam lobe could fall down inside the engine. So what we need to do before that fuel pump comes out is we have to make sure everything's loose and the pump is just sitting in there. Then we're going to roll the engine over, and I should see that fuel pump lift up. And when it lifts up, then I know it's safe to pull it out without having fear of that push rod falling down in the engine. So I'm just going to take a long razor blade and get right down in here, and I'm just going to cut through that hose. This stuff is so rock hard, it's darn near impossible to cut easily. There it goes. All right. Okay, so now we just got a 24mm socket on the crank, and we're going to roll this engine over. And if you watch, that fuel pump should start to kind of pick itself up. Right there, it's starting to move. Okay, so right there is good enough. That's all that we need. And now, you can just give this here a little wiggle. Oh, look at that. That push rod is actually still intact. It stayed on that fuel pump. So this is a little guy right here. You got to be worried about falling out, because if that goes inside the engine, then you get to play fish and try and find it. So here we are at the start of a new night. I actually had to stop last night, and I had dinner plans that I had to deal with, so didn't really get to finish much, but here we are off of work. We're back at it again. So I'm gonna pick up where we left off with getting the fuel bowl out of here and trying to get the rest of everything on this engine stripped down. All right, so the first thing we're gonna get started with here is getting this fan off, which sometimes they can get stuck on there. They can be kind of tight. A couple tools that you can use that make this a whole bunch easier. You can use a chain wrench right on the water pump pulley. And then the other thing that ends up being a huge help is by getting this tool right here, where you use an air hammer with a 1 7/8 inch wrench to knock that nut loose. So it is a standard rotation, so righty tighty, lefty loosey. And just like that, it'll come loose. Let me try and give you a little better look of what we got going on here. To get this fuel bowl out, we've got one connector right here. It actually has a little metal bracket that's secured with this torque screw that's up in here. And that is kind of the main harness for the fuel bowl. So we're going to undo that. And then we're going to take out these two return lines. There's one here and one here. These are the ones that it returns back from the head. And then over on this side of it, we have this one fuel line right here that we're going to have to take off. A couple of bolts down here at the bottom. There's a 13 millimeter head right here, and there's a 13 millimeter head right here. And then this fuel bowl should just lift right out. Okay, so there's the T25 screw, and now we can unplug this connector. Now we got our wire harness undone. All right, so now we got a 15 millimeter wrench here, and we're just going to pop these off. So one thing I should mention here, with our fuel bowl, down here we have this hose clamp that goes to the little hose, and this is actually the drain hose for that fuel bowl. So now this line actually snakes its way off of this drain, goes back in through here, kind of disappears back here, but it goes to this line here, which I really don't think you can see very well because it's quite greasy. And then it just drains right here. So what I'm going to do is we're going to pull that hose out, but I'm going to wait until I get all these other accessories out of the way so I have room to work around it. But for now, I'm just going to pop this line off from the fuel filter housing, and pull this out. All right, now we got our fuel bowl out. So now you guys can see that this valley is starting to look a lot more like it should, or at least how I intend it to look anyway. So really by the time we're done, the only thing we're gonna have here is that glow plug relay, high pressure oil pump, the wire harness, and then obviously we're gonna have fuel lines and a turbo sitting back here. But kind of cleans this up a lot. It gives us a lot more room to see what's going on. So you can kind of get a better look now. Here you can see your IPR, the high pressure oil pump. You can see the supply and return fuel lines. You can see the ICP sensor. Everything is just a lot more accessible with that fuel bowl out of the way. And also you can kind of get an idea of if you have a leak, how bad it is, and kind of get an idea of where it's coming from. So a lot of benefits to pulling all that stuff out. Well guys, that's about all the time that we got for tonight. So again, thank you for checking out my first ever episode. Kind of feels a little awkward talking to a camera. So if there's anything you guys notice that I could do better, something you'd like to see, just give me a comment and I'll try and reply back. And as always, please like, subscribe, share, comment, and I'll catch you on the next episode.